Story: The Village Hidden in the Forest. The road that disappeared into the forest. Deep in the northern mountains of America, far away from crowded cities and busy highways, there was a forest that few people knew existed. It was not shown on modern maps. There were no signs pointing toward it. No large roads passed through its trees. Only a small, forgotten path remained, covered with soft grass and fallen leaves, waiting quietly for someone to discover it. The forest was called Willow Shade Forest. During the day, sunlight moved slowly through the tall trees, creating golden patterns on the ground. The air smelled of pine, wildflowers, and fresh rain. Small streams traveled between the rocks, making gentle sounds that sounded almost like a peaceful song. Most people who lived nearby believed the forest was empty, but they were wrong. Hidden beyond the deepest part of the woods was a small village. A village where people lived differently. A village where mornings began with birds singing instead of alarm clocks. A village where evenings were spent beside warm fireplaces instead of glowing screens. A village where people still remembered the simple joys of life. But nobody from the outside world had visited the village for many years. Until one autumn evening, a traveler named Daniel Harper found the hidden path. Daniel had spent most of his life in the city. He lived among tall buildings, busy streets, and endless noise. Every morning, he woke up to traffic sounds. Every afternoon, he rushed from one place to another. Every night, he looked out of his apartment window and wondered when life had become so fast. He was not unhappy, but he felt tired. Not the kind of tiredness that sleep could fix. It was a tiredness that came from living too quickly. One evening, after a long week, Daniel decided to leave the city for a while. He packed a small bag, his old camera, a notebook, and a book that he had never finished reading. He wanted to find somewhere quiet, somewhere peaceful, somewhere where he could hear his own thoughts again. For several days, Daniel traveled through the countryside. He passed small farms, quiet rivers, and old wooden houses surrounded by fields. The further he traveled, the quieter the world became. Eventually, he reached the edge of Willow Shade Forest. The sky was turning orange as the sun began to disappear behind the mountains. Daniel looked at the forest. Something about it felt different. Not scary, not mysterious, just peaceful, almost as if the forest was waiting. He followed a small path between the trees. The sound of the outside world slowly disappeared. No cars, no machines, only the sound of leaves moving gently in the wind. After walking for almost an hour, Daniel noticed something unusual. There were small lanterns hanging from the trees. Warm golden lights glowing softly in the evening darkness. He followed the lights, and then, through the trees, he saw something he never expected. A village. The village was surrounded by tall trees and mountains. Small wooden houses stood beside gardens filled with flowers. Smoke gently rose from chimneys. People walked slowly along stone paths, carrying baskets of vegetables and freshly baked bread. Children laughed near a small wooden bridge. An old clock tower stood in the center of the village, but Daniel noticed something strange. The clock had stopped. The hands had not moved for many years, yet nobody seemed worried. Nobody seemed to care, because in this village, time was not measured by clocks. It was measured by moments. Daniel stood quietly at the edge of the village. He wondered if he was dreaming. Then an elderly man approached him. The man had silver hair, kind eyes, and a peaceful smile. "Welcome," the old man said. Daniel looked surprised. "You know who I am?" The man smiled. "No, but we know when someone needs to find this place." Daniel looked toward the village lights. "What is this place?" The old man looked around at the peaceful houses. "This is Willowbrook Village, a place that the world forgot, and a place that remembers what the world has forgotten." The old man introduced himself as Samuel, the village keeper. He invited Daniel to stay for the night. Daniel wanted to ask many questions. How did this village exist? Why did nobody know about it? Why did everyone seem so peaceful? But as he followed Samuel through the village, he slowly realized something. For the first time in many years, he was not in a hurry. That night, Daniel stayed in a small wooden cottage near the forest. The room was simple. A comfortable bed, a warm fireplace, a small window looking toward the trees. Outside, the forest whispered softly. The wind moved through the branches. The river flowed nearby, and somewhere in the distance, an owl called into the night. Daniel closed his eyes, and for the first time in a very long time, he slept peacefully. The morning came quietly to Willowbrook Village. There was no loud alarm, no ringing phone, no sound of engines passing through the streets. Instead, Daniel woke up to the gentle song of birds resting on the branches outside his window. For a few moments, he remained still. His eyes were open, but his mind was slowly returning from a deep and peaceful sleep. The room felt different from any place he had slept before. The wooden walls carried the soft scent of pine. The warm blanket felt heavy and comfortable. The sunlight entering through the small window was not bright or harsh. It was soft, almost like the morning itself was trying not to disturb him. Daniel sat up slowly and looked around the small cottage. On the wooden table beside the window was a small vase filled with wildflowers. Next to it was a handwritten note. Daniel picked it up. The paper was old, but the handwriting was clear. "Good morning, traveler. Breakfast waits at the village hall. Take your time. The village will still be here." Daniel smiled. The words were simple, but somehow they felt unusual. In the city, everyone was always waiting for something. A meeting, a message, a deadline, a notification. But here, someone was telling him that he could simply take his time. Daniel stepped outside. The air was cool and fresh. A thin layer of mist covered the ground, floating between the trees like a soft white blanket. The village was already awake, but it was not a rushed kind of morning. People moved slowly, naturally. An old woman watered flowers beside her house. A farmer carried baskets of fresh vegetables. Children walked toward a small wooden school building, laughing quietly as they crossed the stone path. Everyone seemed to know each other. Everyone greeted each other, not with quick waves while passing by, but with real conversations, real smiles, real attention. As Daniel walked toward the village hall, he saw Samuel standing beside a large oak tree. "Good morning, Daniel," Samuel said. "Did you sleep well?" Daniel nodded. "Better than I have in years," Samuel smiled. "The forest is good at helping people remember how to rest." Daniel looked around. "How many people live here?" Samuel looked toward the village. "About 200. 200? Daniel asked. "How can a whole village stay hidden here?" Samuel laughed softly. "Because most people are looking for something bigger. They search for taller buildings, faster cars, and louder places. They rarely search for quiet." Inside the village hall, Daniel saw a long wooden table covered with breakfast, fresh bread, warm oatmeal, honey from local bees, fresh berries from the forest, and tea made from herbs that grew near the river. Everyone sat together. There were no separate tables, no one eating alone, no one looking at a screen. Daniel sat beside Samuel. "This is beautiful," Daniel said. Samuel looked around. "It was not always like this." Daniel looked curious. "What do you mean?" Samuel took a slow sip of tea. "Many years ago, the people of Willowbrook were not different from the people outside. They wanted more money, more success, more things. But one day, they realized they had gained everything except peace." Samuel explained that Willowbrook was founded almost 200 years ago. The first villagers were travelers, farmers, artists, and families who wanted a simpler life. They discovered the hidden valley and decided to build a home there. They planted trees, built houses, created gardens, and made a promise. A promise that the village would always remember three things: nature, kindness, time. After breakfast, Samuel introduced Daniel to some of the villagers. The first person was Elena, the village gardener. She was a woman in her 60s who knew every plant and flower in the forest. "This is Daniel," Samuel said. "He is visiting our village." Elena smiled warmly. Then he must see the gardens. She took Daniel through a beautiful area behind the village. There were flowers of every color, small vegetable fields, fruit trees, and plants Daniel had never seen before. "How do you grow so many things?" Daniel asked. Elena touched a small flower gently. "We listen." Daniel looked confused. "Listen?" "Yes," she said. "Plants tell us what they need. People often forget that nature is always speaking." Later, Daniel met Thomas, the village carpenter. Thomas built almost everything in Willowbrook: the houses, the bridges, the wooden chairs, the small boats used on the nearby lake. Daniel noticed that Thomas worked very slowly, carefully. Every piece of wood was shaped with patience. "Don't you ever want to finish faster?" Daniel asked. Thomas smiled. "When you rush your work, you only create an object. But when you give something your time, you create something with a story." Daniel looked at the wooden chair Thomas was making. For the first time, he understood. The chair was not just a chair. Someone's hands had created it. Someone's patience was inside it. Someone's memories would become connected to it. In the afternoon, Daniel walked through the village with a young boy named Leo. Leo was about 10 years old and loved exploring the forest. "Do you ever get bored here?" Daniel asked. Leo looked surprised. "Bored? Why would I be bored? We have rivers to explore, trees to climb, stories to hear, and stars to watch." Daniel laughed. In the city, children needed endless entertainment. Here, the world itself was enough. As evening approached, Daniel returned to his cottage. He sat outside near the small garden. The sky slowly changed colors: orange, pink, then deep blue. The village became quiet. Lights appeared in windows. Smoke rose gently from chimneys. Somewhere nearby, someone played a soft melody on an old wooden instrument. Daniel watched the peaceful scene. He thought about his life before coming here. The endless rushing, the constant noise, the feeling that he was always chasing something, but he never knew what he was chasing. That night, before sleeping, Daniel wrote in his notebook, "Today I learned something strange. The people here do not have everything. They do not have the newest technology. They do not have the biggest houses. They do not have the busiest lives. but somehow they seem richer than anyone I have ever met. Outside his window, the forest whispered softly, the same sound that had welcomed him the night before. Daniel closed his eyes, and as he slowly drifted into sleep, he wondered. Chapter 3: The Secret of the Stopped Clock Tower. The third morning in Willowbrook Village arrived with a gentle rain. The sound of water falling from the leaves created a soft rhythm outside Daniel's window, drop by drop, branch by branch. The forest seemed to be singing a quiet morning song. Daniel stayed in bed for a few extra moments, listening. In another life, he would have already checked his phone. He would have looked at messages. He would have thought about everything waiting for him. But here, inside the hidden village, there was nothing demanding his attention. Only the rain. Only the forest. Only the peaceful feeling of being exactly where he was. After breakfast, Daniel walked through the village. The rain had stopped, and small drops of water rested on flowers and wooden fences like tiny pieces of glass. As he walked along the stone path, he looked again at the old clock tower standing in the center of the village. It was impossible not to notice. The tower was tall and beautiful, made from dark wooden beams and old stones covered with green moss. But the clock face remained frozen. The hands pointed toward the same time. 6:15. They had not moved, not even once. Daniel found Samuel sitting beneath a large tree near the tower. The old man was reading a worn-out book. "Samuel," Daniel said, "can I ask you something?" Samuel closed the book and smiled. "Of course." Daniel looked at the clock tower. "Why did the clock stop?" For a moment, Samuel said nothing. He looked at the tower as if he was remembering a story from a very distant time. Then he answered softly, "Because one day, the people of Willowbrook realized they were listening to the clock more than they were listening to life." Daniel sat beside him. "What happened?" Samuel looked toward the forest. "Many years ago, this village was not as peaceful as it is today. The people worked hard. They built homes, grew crops, and created a beautiful community. But slowly, something changed." Samuel explained that as the village grew, people became focused on time. The clock tower had been built by the first villagers as a symbol of organization. It was meant to help people remember important moments. When to plant crops, when to gather, when to celebrate, when to rest. At first, the clock was helpful, but over the years, something changed. People began waking up because the clock told them to wake up. They ate because the clock told them it was time to eat. They stopped working because the clock told them the day was finished. They began measuring their lives in minutes instead of memories. People started saying things like, Samuel lowered his voice, "I don't have enough time. I am running out of time. I wish I had more time." But the strange thing was, Samuel looked at Daniel. They had the same number of hours as everyone else. They simply forgot how to use them. One evening, many years ago, the villagers gathered around the clock tower. Everyone was tired. Everyone was busy. Everyone felt like life was moving too quickly. An elderly woman named Margaret Willow, one of the village founders, stood beneath the tower. She looked at the clock and said, "We built this clock to help us remember life, but now we are allowing it to make us forget." That night, the villagers made a decision. They stopped the clock. Not because they hated time, but because they wanted to understand it. The village carpenter climbed the tower. He carefully moved the clock hands to 6:15. Then he stopped the mechanism. The clock became silent. And strangely, the village became peaceful. "Did nobody try to repair it?" Daniel asked. Samuel smiled. "Many visitors have asked that question. But the villagers decided something. What? Samuel looked at the clock. That a broken clock can still teach a perfect lesson. Daniel looked up at the frozen clock. What lesson? Samuel answered. That time is not something we chase. It is something we experience. For the rest of the afternoon, Samuel showed Daniel the places where the villagers marked important moments. Not with clocks, with memories. A large tree near the river was called the First Morning Tree. It was planted when the first families arrived in Willowbrook. A small wooden bridge was called the Friendship Bridge. It was built when two families who had argued for years finally forgave each other. A garden near the village center was called the Memory Garden. Each flower represented someone who had brought kindness into the village. Daniel walked slowly through these places. He realized something. Outside the forest, people often tried to capture moments with photographs. But here, people created moments worth remembering. That evening, Daniel sat beside the clock tower. The village lights glowed softly around him. Children played nearby. Older villagers shared stories. Someone laughed. Someone sang. Nobody checked the time. Nobody worried about being late. The sun simply disappeared when it was ready. The moon appeared when it was ready. And everyone accepted the rhythm of the world. A young girl named Lily sat beside Daniel. "Do you miss your home?" she asked. Daniel thought for a moment. "I don't know. Maybe I missed some things. But I think I forgot something important." "What?" Daniel looked at the stopped clock. "I forgot how to enjoy a moment without waiting for the next one." That night, Daniel returned to his cottage. Before sleeping, he opened his notebook. He wrote, "Today I learned that time is not the numbers on a clock. Time is the sound of rain. Time is a conversation with a friend. Time is watching the sunset without checking when it will end. Maybe the people of Willowbrook are not living without time. Maybe they are finally living with it." Outside, the old clock tower stood silently. The hands remained frozen at 6:15. But beneath the tower, life continued. Slowly, peacefully, beautifully. That night, the rain returned to Willowshade Forest. Not heavily, not loudly, just a soft, steady rainfall that seemed to fall gently on the world, as if the sky itself was trying not to disturb anyone. Daniel lay in his bed, listening. The sound of rain on leaves. The faint crackle of the fireplace slowly fading. The distant call of an owl somewhere deep in the trees. In the city, silence had always felt uncomfortable to him. But here, silence felt alive. He didn't know when sleep took him. But when he woke up, something felt different. Not outside. Inside. There was a quiet pull in his thoughts. A feeling that the forest was calling him. Not in words, not in sounds, but in memories. By morning, the sky had cleared. The air was fresh, washed clean by the rain. Daniel stepped outside his cottage and noticed something unusual. The forest looked brighter than before, not because of sunlight, but because everything seemed more alive. Even the shadows between the trees felt soft instead of dark. As Daniel walked toward the village center, he found Samuel waiting for him again. This time, the old man was not reading. He was simply standing still, looking toward the forest, as if he had been waiting. "You feel it now, don't you?" Samuel asked quietly. Daniel paused. "Feel what?" Samuel turned toward him. "The forest." Daniel hesitated. "I don't know what I feel, but it's strange, like it's pulling me somewhere." Samuel nodded slowly. "It means the forest is starting to notice you." They walked together toward the edge of Willowshade Forest. The path was the same as before. Soft ground, tall trees, dancing leaves. But today, Daniel noticed something he hadn't seen before. The deeper they went, the quieter everything became. Even the wind felt slower here. Even the light seemed softer. After a while, Samuel stopped beside an old stone marker covered in moss. Daniel looked around. "This place feels familiar," he said. Samuel smiled faintly. "That is because the forest remembers everyone who walks into it." Daniel frowned. "Remembers?" Samuel placed his hand gently on the stone. "Not like humans remember names or faces. The forest remembers feelings." Daniel looked confused. Samuel continued, "Every person who ever lived near Willowbrook, every traveler who ever entered this forest, they left something behind." Daniel stepped closer. "What kind of things?" Samuel looked into the trees. "Moments, emotions, choices, silences." A soft wind moved through the branches, and suddenly Daniel felt it. A strange sensation in the air, like the forest was breathing around him. Samuel spoke again. "When people feel peace here, the forest keeps it. When people feel sadness here, the forest softens it. When people feel lost here, the forest holds it until they are ready to let go." Daniel slowly placed his hand on a nearby tree. The bark was rough, warm, almost comforting. And then something strange happened. A memory that was not his own flickered in his mind. A woman sitting beneath this same tree, crying softly, then smiling as sunlight broke through the branches. A child running through the forest, laughing without fear. An old man sitting quietly, closing his eyes, finally at peace. Daniel quickly pulled his hand back. "What was that?" he asked, startled. Samuel nodded as if he expected it. "The forest does that sometimes." Daniel stepped back. "Are you saying I saw someone else's memory?" Samuel answered gently. "Not exactly saw. You felt it. The forest does not store images like a camera. It stores impressions of life." They continued walking deeper. The trees grew taller here, thicker, older. Some trunks were so wide they looked ancient beyond imagination. The forest floor was covered in soft moss that made every step silent. Samuel pointed toward a clearing ahead. "There." Daniel followed his gaze. In the center of the clearing stood something unexpected. A circle of stones, each one different. Some smooth, some cracked, some covered in vines. "What is this place?" Daniel asked. Samuel lowered his voice. "The place where memories gather." Daniel stepped into the circle slowly. The air felt different here, heavier, but not in a bad way. It felt meaningful, Samuel continued. "Long ago, villagers discovered that when people came here during moments of strong emotion, the forest would hold those feelings. So they built this place to honor it, not to control it, but to respect it." Daniel sat on one of the stones. For a moment, he closed his eyes, and the forest responded. He felt something again. Not a full memory this time, just emotions, a feeling of someone letting go of anger, a feeling of forgiveness, a feeling of starting over, a feeling of peace after a long struggle. Daniel opened his eyes slowly. "This place, it's not just a forest," he said quietly. Samuel nodded. "No, it is a living record of everything people forget to say out loud." A long silence followed. The wind moved gently through the trees. Leaves fell slowly like soft whispers. Daniel finally spoke again. Why don't the villagers tell the outside world about this place? Samuel looked at him for a long time before answering, because most people outside are still too loud inside. They would not hear the forest. Daniel understood what he meant. In the city, people often spoke loudly, not always with their voices, but with their thoughts, their worries, their rush, their distractions. Here, the forest required quiet, not in sound, but in the heart. As the sun began to lower in the sky, Samuel stood up. It is time to return. Daniel followed him, still thinking, still feeling the strange calm in his chest. On the way back, Daniel asked softly, "Samuel, why did I come here?" The old man did not answer immediately. He looked at the forest first, then at Daniel, and finally said, "Some people come here to find peace. Some come to escape their life. But a few come because they are ready to remember something they forgot." Daniel did not ask what that meant, not yet. But deep inside, he felt something shifting, like a door inside him had quietly opened. That night, Daniel sat outside his cottage again. The forest was darker now, but not empty. It felt full, alive, watching gently, protecting softly. He opened his notebook and wrote, "The forest does not speak, but it listens better than anyone I have ever known. And in its silence, I hear parts of myself I didn't know were missing." A soft wind moved through the trees, and for a moment, it almost sounded like the forest was breathing his name. The morning light in Willowbrook Village arrived slowly, as if it was also waking up without hurry. Soft sunlight slipped through the trees and rested on the rooftops of wooden houses. The air was calm, warm, familiar in a way Daniel could not explain. For the first time in many years, he did not feel the need to rush out of bed. He simply lay there for a while, listening to the village waking up around him. A rooster calling somewhere far away. A gentle knock of wood from a carpenter starting his work. Footsteps on stone paths. Quiet conversations between neighbors greeting each other. Life was happening, but it was not chasing him. When Daniel finally stepped outside, Samuel was already waiting near the edge of the path. "You are starting to look more like someone who belongs here," Samuel said with a small smile. Daniel looked down at himself as if checking. "I don't feel like I belong anywhere yet," he replied honestly. Samuel nodded slowly. "That is usually how belonging begins." They walked together toward the village center. But today, something felt different for Daniel. The village no longer felt like a place he was visiting. It felt like a place he was slowly learning, like a language he did not speak yet, but could almost understand. As they passed through the streets, villagers greeted Daniel more naturally now. Elena, the gardener, waved from her flower beds. Thomas, the carpenter, nodded from his workshop. Even the children smiled at him as if he had always been there. Daniel noticed something strange. No one asked him when he would leave. No one treated him like a stranger anymore. They simply accepted him as part of their day. At the village hall, breakfast was already prepared again. But today, Daniel did not feel like a visitor sitting at someone else's table. He felt included. Samuel noticed this and said quietly, "The village has a way of doing that." "Doing what?" Daniel asked, noticing when someone stops feeling like a guest. After breakfast, Samuel brought Daniel to a small wooden building near the river. It was not large, but it looked older than most buildings in the village. The door was open. Inside, sunlight filtered through glass windows, landing on rows of shelves. Books. Hundreds of them. Some new, some very old, some handwritten. Daniel stepped inside slowly. "What is this place?" he asked. Samuel answered softly. "This is the village memory house." Daniel looked around. "It looks like a library." Samuel nodded. "It is, but not only for books." He walked toward a shelf and picked up a worn notebook. "This is where villagers leave pieces of their lives." Daniel frowned. "Pieces?" Samuel handed him the book. Daniel opened it carefully. Inside were handwritten entries, not stories of events, but feelings. "Today I forgave my brother after 5 years. Today I learned how to sit alone without feeling lonely. Today I stopped being afraid of silence." Daniel closed the book slowly. "This is not like normal writing," he said. Samuel smiled. "Most books are about what people did. These are about what people became." Daniel walked deeper into the room. On another shelf, he found drawings. Not perfect art, but honest sketches. A sunrise, a broken fence repaired with care, a child holding an old man's hand. Something inside Daniel shifted again. Not loudly, not suddenly, but gently, like a thought he had never allowed himself to think before. "Samuel," Daniel said quietly, "can someone stay here permanently?" Samuel did not answer immediately. Instead, he looked at Daniel carefully. "Why do you ask?" Daniel hesitated. "I don't know. I just feel calmer here than anywhere I have ever been." Samuel placed the notebook back on the shelf. "Many people feel that way when they first arrive, but feeling like you belong and actually belonging are not the same thing." That evening, Daniel walked alone through the village. The sun was setting behind the mountains, painting the sky in soft shades of orange and purple. He passed familiar places now. The garden, the bridge, the clock tower still frozen at 6:15. But something inside him was changing. He no longer looked at the village like an outsider. He looked at it like someone trying to understand home. He sat near the river. The water moved slowly over smooth stones. The sound was steady, peaceful. Daniel picked up a small stone and held it in his hand. He thought about the city, the noise, the deadlines, the constant pressure to move forward. And then he thought about this place, where even time seemed to rest. For the first time, a strange thought entered his mind. What if he did not go back? He did not say it out loud, but the thought stayed, quietly, like a seed planted in still soil. Later that night, Samuel found Daniel sitting outside his cottage. "You are thinking deeply," Samuel said. Daniel nodded slowly. "I keep wondering if I should leave or stay." Samuel sat beside him. "And what does your heart say?" Daniel looked at the forest. "It says nothing clearly," Samuel smiled. "That is because it is not used to being listened to." A long silence followed. The forest moved gently around them. Leaves rustled softly. Somewhere far away, a stream flowed through rocks like a lullaby. Samuel finally spoke again. "You do not have to decide today." Daniel looked at him. "Then when?" Samuel replied. "When the answer stops feeling like a question." Daniel closed his eyes, and for the first time, he did not imagine tomorrow as something he needed to prepare for. He simply let it exist. That night, as he lay in bed, Daniel wrote in his notebook, "Today I learned something strange. Home is not a place I find. It is a feeling that slowly finds me, and for the first time, I think it is starting to look like this village." Outside, the forest was quiet, not empty, just calm, as if it was waiting for Daniel to understand one more thing before he could decide what to do next. That night, the forest was unusually quiet, not the peaceful kind of quiet Daniel had grown used to, but a deeper silence, as if even the wind was moving more carefully than usual. Daniel lay in bed for a long time, awake, staring at the wooden ceiling. The fireplace had gone out. Only faint moonlight entered through the window, painting soft shapes on the floor. Something inside him felt restless. Not fear, not excitement. Something in between, like a memory trying to form, but not yet ready. Around midnight, Daniel finally stood up. He didn't know why. He didn't plan it. He simply felt called. He put on his coat and stepped outside. The village was asleep. No lights in the windows, no footsteps on the stone paths, only the faint glow of the moon reflecting off wet leaves from earlier rain. The clock tower stood still in the center of it all, 6:15, forever unchanged. Daniel walked slowly through the village. His feet made almost no sound. It felt like the world was holding its breath. Without realizing it, he found himself standing in front of the clock tower. He looked up at it, and for the first time, he noticed something strange, a small wooden door at the base of the tower. He had never seen it before. Daniel hesitated, then gently pushed it open. It was not locked. The door creaked softly, as if it had been waiting for him. Inside was darkness, and a narrow staircase leading downward. A cold breeze came from below, not uncomfortable, just old, like air that had not been disturbed in a very long time. Daniel swallowed slowly and stepped inside. Each step downward made the world above feel farther away. The wooden stairs turned into stone. The light from the village disappeared behind him. Only his breathing remained, slow, careful. After what felt like several minutes, Daniel reached the bottom. There was a large wooden door, strangely new compared to everything around it. On it, carved carefully, were words, "The memory beneath time." Daniel placed his hand on the door. It opened instantly. Inside was a vast underground library. But calling it a library did not feel enough. It was something more. Shelves stretched in every direction, disappearing into soft golden light that seemed to have no source. Books were everywhere. Old scrolls, stone tablets, handwritten journals, wooden boxes filled with letters. The air was warm and still. Daniel stepped forward slowly. "This is impossible," he whispered. A voice answered him, calm, familiar. "Samuel, I was wondering when you would find this place," the old man said. Daniel turned around quickly. "You knew about this?" Samuel nodded. "Of course. This is the heart of Willowbrook." Daniel looked around again. "These are books?" Samuel shook his head gently. "Not just books. These are memories people could not carry anymore." Daniel walked toward a nearby shelf. He picked up a small leather-bound journal. As soon as he opened it, a sensation rushed through him. Not words, not images, feelings. A young woman standing in the rain, smiling as if she had finally forgiven herself. A man leaving his home, not in sadness, but in peace. A child learning to read under candlelight. Daniel quickly closed the book. His breathing became uneven. "What is happening?" he asked. Samuel stepped closer. "The library does not speak to your eyes. It speaks to what you have buried inside you." Daniel looked down at his hands. "They feel so real." Samuel nodded. "They are real. They are just not yours." Daniel took a step back. "This place, it holds everyone's memories?" Samuel answered slowly. "Not all memories. Only the ones people could not keep in their hearts." A long silence followed. The soft glow of the library seemed to breathe around them. Daniel finally asked, Why does this exist beneath the village? Samuel walked slowly between the shelves. Because humans forget. Not because they are careless, but because life becomes too heavy to hold everything. He stopped in front of a tall shelf. This place was created to help them let go. Not by erasing memories, but by giving them somewhere safe to rest. Daniel followed him. "And the forest?" he asked. Samuel smiled faintly. "The forest protects it. Above, the trees remember feelings. Below, the library remembers stories." Daniel felt overwhelmed. "This village, it feels like it has layers of life I can't understand." Samuel nodded. "Most people don't see layers. They only see what is on the surface." Daniel walked deeper into the library, and then something stopped him. A book on a lower shelf, different from the others. Newer, almost recent. He reached for it. The moment he touched it, a sharp, familiar feeling passed through him. Not a memory of the forest, not a memory of the village, but something else. A city, a room, a window, and a version of himself sitting alone, staring at nothing, feeling like time was moving too fast to catch. Daniel dropped the book instantly. "No," he whispered. "That's not." But he couldn't finish the sentence, because part of him knew. It was him. Samuel placed a calm hand on his shoulder. "You see now. This place does not only hold villagers' memories. It responds to those who are ready to see themselves clearly." Daniel stepped back, shaken. "I didn't come here by accident, did I?" Samuel looked at him with quiet understanding. "No one comes here by accident. But not everyone comes by choice either." Daniel's voice lowered. "Then why did I come?" Samuel answered softly. "Because something inside you was tired of being forgotten." A long silence filled the underground library. The shelves seemed endless. The light seemed alive. And Daniel stood there, caught between who he was and who he might become. Finally, Samuel spoke again. "You should rest. But remember, this place now exists in you too." Daniel nodded slowly, but he did not fully understand what that meant. Not yet. As they left the hidden library and climbed back toward the village, Daniel looked once more at the stone steps behind him. Something had changed. Not outside. Inside. That night, in his cottage, Daniel could not sleep easily. He opened his notebook and wrote, "There is a place beneath the village where memories do not disappear. They simply wait until someone is ready to feel them." And tonight, I think I saw something I was not ready for. Outside, the forest remained quiet, but it no longer felt like simple silence. It felt like something was watching gently, waiting patiently, as if the next chapter of Daniel's life had already begun, and it was already being written. The next morning, Daniel woke up feeling different, not physically. Nothing in the room had changed. The same wooden walls, the same soft light through the window, the same distant sound of the forest breathing gently beyond the village. But inside him, something had shifted. The underground library still echoed in his mind, not as images, but as a quiet awareness, like he had opened a door in his thoughts that refused to fully close again. He sat on the edge of his bed for a long time before stepping outside. The village looked normal, peaceful as always. Children running between houses, smoke rising from chimneys, the smell of fresh bread drifting through the air. But today, there was something extra, a subtle excitement, not loud, not chaotic, but present, like anticipation hidden under calm skin. As Daniel walked toward the village center, he noticed villagers preparing something unusual. Lanterns were being hung along the paths. Colorful fabric was being placed on wooden poles. Tables were being arranged in open spaces. Flowers were being collected from gardens. Daniel stopped Elena, the gardener. "What's happening?" he asked. Elena smiled warmly. "You haven't heard? Hear what?" She looked toward the forest. "The Winter Night Festival is coming!" Daniel frowned slightly. "A festival?" Elena nodded. "It only happens once every year, when the forest becomes the quietest it can be." Later, Daniel met Samuel near the clock tower. Samuel was watching villagers prepare the square. "You're seeing something special today," Samuel said. Daniel crossed his arms. "What exactly is the Winter Night Festival?" Samuel paused. "It is not a celebration like the outside world understands it." Daniel looked curious. "Then what is it?" Samuel answered softly. "It is a night where the village remembers why it chose silence over noise. That evening, the village transformed, but not in a flashy way. There were no loudspeakers, no bright electric lights, only lanterns, soft golden flames, warm reflections on wooden houses and stone paths. The entire village felt like it had turned into a living painting. As the sun disappeared behind the mountains, villagers gathered in the central open space near the river. Daniel stood among them, watching, listening, feeling. Samuel walked to the center and raised his hand gently. The village became quiet, not forced quiet, natural quiet, as if everyone had been waiting for this silence all day. "The Winter Night Festival," Samuel began, "is not about celebration. It is about remembrance." Daniel noticed something strange. No one was smiling loudly. No one was performing. Instead, people stood in small groups, holding lanterns, looking at each other with calm eyes. Samuel continued. "Long ago, before this village learned how to live slowly, people here were tired, not of work, but of forgetting themselves. A fire was lit in the center of the square. Not a large fire, just enough to glow warmly." Samuel spoke again. "So every year, on this night, we remember the version of ourselves we almost lost." A woman stepped forward first. She held a small lantern. "I am Mira," she said softly. "I remember the year I was too busy to see my children grow." A gentle silence followed. Then she smiled. "But I am here now." Another villager stepped forward. "I am Thomas. I remember when I thought building faster meant building better. But I learned that time is also part of craftsmanship. One by one, villagers shared simple memories, not dramatic stories, but quiet truths. Moments of stress, moments of realization, moments of change, and moments of letting go." Daniel stood still, listening. Something about it felt deeply emotional, not heavy, but grounding, like the village was gently reminding itself who it was. Samuel turned to Daniel. "You don't have to speak," he said softly, "but tonight has a way of asking questions." Daniel nodded slightly, but he didn't answer. Not yet. As the night deepened, music began. Soft, slow, played on wooden instruments. Nothing modern, nothing loud. Just gentle notes floating through the cold air. Children sat near their families. Elders watched the fire. The river beside the village reflected the lantern light like moving stars. The forest around them stood still, almost listening. Daniel walked slightly away from the crowd. Toward the edge of the river, he sat on a stone, and for a long time, he simply watched. A child approached him quietly. It was Leo. "Why are you alone?" Leo asked. Daniel smiled faintly. I'm not sure I know how to join something like this. Leo sat beside him. It's easy, he said. You just remember something. Daniel looked at him. Remember what? Leo shrugged. Anything that made you feel real. Daniel looked back at the festival, the lanterns, the people, the fire, the forest beyond, and slowly, memories began to surface. Not one single memory, but fragments. His life in the city, the rushing mornings, the tired evenings, the feeling of always being behind something invisible, and then a quieter memory, something softer. A moment he had forgotten he ever needed. Sitting alone once, staring out of a window, wishing for silence. Daniel closed his eyes, and for the first time that night, he allowed himself to feel it fully. When he opened his eyes again, Samuel was standing nearby. Do you feel it now? Samuel asked. Daniel nodded slowly. Yes. Samuel sat beside him. That is what this night is for, Daniel spoke quietly. I used to think silence meant emptiness. Samuel shook his head gently. Silence is not empty. It is where you hear what noise hides. A long pause followed. The festival continued behind them. Soft laughter. Gentle music. Warm light. Daniel finally asked, Samuel, why did I really come here? Samuel did not look surprised. He answered calmly, because you were ready to stop running from your own life. Daniel looked at the river. I don't know if I'm ready to stay, Samuel nodded. That is fine. Tonight is not about deciding. It is about feeling. The wind moved gently through the trees. Lanterns flickered softly. The forest stood still like a silent witness. And for the first time since arriving in Willowbrook, Daniel did not feel like an outsider watching a world he didn't belong to. He felt like someone standing at the edge of something familiar, something waiting for him. That night, as the festival slowly quieted and villagers returned to their homes, Daniel remained by the river for a long time. The lantern reflections faded slowly into darkness, but inside him, something remained glowing. Before sleeping, Daniel wrote, Tonight I learned that memories are not only things we carry, they are things that carry us. And sometimes we need to return to them to understand where we are going. Outside, the forest breathed softly, not as silence, but as presence, as if it had witnessed everything and was waiting for the next choice Daniel would make. The morning after the Winter Night Festival felt unusually still, not silent in the way the forest usually was, but gentle, as if the entire village was resting after remembering something important. Daniel woke up slowly. For a moment, he didn't move. He just listened. Birds outside the window, a soft breeze brushing against the trees, distant footsteps on stone paths, and beneath all of it, that quiet feeling inside him that had been growing for days. Something had changed in him, not suddenly, but deeply. When he stepped outside, the village looked the same. The clock tower still stood frozen at 6:15. The lanterns from last night had been removed. Life had returned to its calm rhythm. But Daniel saw it differently now. He no longer looked at the village as something mysterious. He looked at it as something alive, something that had been teaching him without words. Samuel was waiting near the river. He did not speak at first. He simply stood there, watching the water move slowly over the stones. Daniel joined him. For a long time, neither of them spoke. Finally, Daniel broke the silence. I understand something now, he said quietly. Samuel turned toward him. What do you understand? Daniel looked at the forest. This place is not about escaping the world. It's about remembering how to live inside it. Samuel nodded slowly, as if he had been waiting for those words. Yes, he said. That is what most people misunderstand. They walked together through the village one last time. Daniel noticed details he had ignored before. A woman laughing softly while hanging laundry. An old man carving wood slowly, without hurry. Children drawing shapes in the dirt, completely absorbed in their own world. Everywhere he looked, life was simple, but not empty. Full. Present. As they passed the clock tower, Daniel stopped. He stared at the frozen hands. Why did it really stop at 6:15? He asked. Samuel smiled faintly, because that was the moment the village chose not to rush anymore. Daniel looked confused. Samuel continued. It was not about stopping time. It was about stopping fear. They reached the village center. Samuel finally turned to Daniel. You have been here long enough to see what this place is. Daniel nodded slowly. I think I do. Samuel's voice became softer. Then you also know something else. Daniel looked at him. What? Samuel answered. That Willowbrook does not keep people. It only shows them who they already are. A long silence followed. The forest around them felt calm. Not watching, not judging, just present. Daniel felt something rising inside him, a decision that had been forming quietly since his first night here. He finally spoke. I think I understand why I came. Samuel listened without interrupting. I came because I was tired of living like every moment had to be faster than the last. I thought I needed more time, but I think what I really needed was to feel time again. Samuel nodded gently. That is why the forest called you. Daniel looked toward the trees. I don't want to forget this place, Samuel replied softly. You won't. Places like this do not stay behind you. They stay inside you. Daniel took a deep breath, and for the first time since arriving, he did not feel lost. He felt clear. I think I should go back, he said quietly. Samuel did not look surprised. Instead, he smiled. Most people think leaving means forgetting, but leaving with understanding is different. Daniel looked at him. I don't feel like I'm leaving something behind, Samuel nodded. Because you are not. You are taking it with you. That evening, Daniel stood at the edge of Willowshade Forest. His small bag was ready. The path back to the outside world was the same one he had once followed unknowingly. But now it felt different. Not unknown, just separate. Samuel stood beside him. You are ready? He asked. Daniel thought for a moment, then nodded. Yes! Before Daniel stepped forward, he looked back one last time. The village lights were glowing softly. The clock tower stood silent. The forest behind it all breathed gently in the evening air. Everything felt still. Everything felt alive. Samuel spoke quietly. Daniel! He turned. If you ever feel lost again, don't look for a place like this. Remember what it taught you. Daniel nodded. I will! He began walking down the forest path. Each step felt lighter than the last. Not because the journey was easy, but because he no longer carried the same weight inside him. As he walked, the sounds of the village slowly faded. Birds, wind, distant water, and then silence. But it was no longer the silence of emptiness. It was the silence of understanding. Daniel never saw Willowbrook Village disappear. It did not vanish. It simply became part of the forest again. Part of memory. Part of something he could not point to, but would always feel. And as he reached the edge of the forest, stepping toward the world he once knew, he realized something simple. He was not returning as the same person who had left the city. He was returning as someone who finally understood Not every moment is meant to be rushed. Not every silence needs to be filled. And not every life is measured by how fast it moves, but by how deeply it is felt. Final lines. That night, far beyond Willowshade Forest, Daniel looked up at the city sky. The noise was still there. The movement. The speed. The life. But inside him, there was something else now. A quiet village. A frozen clock. A forest that remembered. And a lesson that would never leave him. He closed his eyes. And for the first time in a long time, he was not trying to escape life. He was simply living it.